Welcome to Future Knowledge, a podcast about knowledge, creativity, and policy, brought to you by the Internet Archive and Authors Alliance.
Welcome to Commonwealth Club World Affairs. My name is Gerald Harris. I am the chair of the club's member-led forum on science and technology, and also a member of the club's board of governors. The focus of the Technology and Society member-led forum is to expose members and attendees to current and emerging developments in science and technology. Now, let me introduce our speakers for this evening. Tim Berners-Lee is the inventor of the World Wide Web, HTML, the URL system, and the HTTP. Berners-Lee proposed an information management system on the 12th of March, 1989, and implemented the first successful communication between a hypertext transfer protocol, HTTP, client and server via the internet in mid-November of that year. He devised and implemented the first web browser and web server and helped foster the web's subsequent development. He is the founder and emeritus director of the World Wide Web Consortium, which oversees the continued development of the web. With Rosemary Lee, he co-founded the World Wide Web Foundation in April of 2009. He was selected as a foreign associate of the National Academy of Sciences. Through his work with the World Wide Web Consortium, the Open Data Institute, and the World Wide Web Foundation, and through the development of the Solid Protocol. And now, as CTO and co-founder of NRUP, he has been a tireless advocate for shared standards, open web access for all, and for the empowerment of individuals on the web. A firm believer in the positive power of technology. He was named in Time Magazine's list of most important people of the 20th century. He has been the recipient of several awards, including the Seoul Peace Prize, the Turing Prize, widely recognized as the Nobel for Computing. He was knighted in 2004 and later appointed to the Order of the Mirror by Her Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. His most recent book, This is for Everyone, The Unfinished Story of the World Wide Web, is available for you to purchase. Joining him, Brewster Kahle, founder and digital librarian of the Internet Archive, is a passionate advocate of public Internet access. He has spent his career intent on a singular focus, providing universal access to all knowledge. Soon after graduating from MIT, Kahle helped found the company Thinking Machines, a parallel supercomputer maker. In 1989, Kahle created the Internet's first publishing system, called the Wide Area Information Server. In 1996, Kahle founded the Internet Archive, and he co-founded Alexa Internet, which helped catalog the web. Joining him as our moderator tonight, Lauren Goode, a senior correspondent with Wired magazine. Her career stints include the Wall Street Journal, The Verge, and Recode. Please join me in welcoming this outstanding panel this evening.
Thank you so much to everyone, and thank you to Brewster and Sir Tim for doing this as well. It's truly an honor to interview you.
Like to having a Commonwealth Club.
We're celebrating a few things tonight. One is your new book.
You can buy the book afterwards.
Which we're going to be talking about. I'm going to ask you a few questions related to that.
It's really good.
Yes. And also, you are celebrating the 1 trillionth webpage archived by the Internet Archive, which is incredible. Do you have a sense of what the 1 trillionth webpage was? I'm just curious.
It's a little hard to exactly say. So we're just celebrating that we're hitting that milestone, but it's probably 1 billion people's voices are now in a library. That's much more than any library's ever had, a record of in the past. So it just shows that people are kind of awesome, right? Because they're really interested in sharing what they know. And the system that Tim built made that possible.
I'm going to make a little proposal right now, which is why don't we just say that it was a Wired.com article? What do you think?
By Lauren.
That's right.
Look for that byline.
Archived forever. And before I get to our questions, you have a little award to present to Sir Tim tonight as well. Would you like to talk about that?
Yes, every year the Internet Archive has the Internet Archive Hero Award for somebody that's really done above and beyond, often taken risks where they've sat out on major opportunities to be able to go and do the public good, to go towards achieving universal access to all knowledge. So we have this Internet Archive Hero Award. This is cool 3D printed thing with a thumb drive that has the first web page on it 300 times, because it turns out that the web page has changed over time. The first web page, if you look at it, has changed. So shall I give it to him now?
Absolutely.
Tim, thank you for being the recipient of this year's award.
Thank you very much.
So I thought that what we're basically going to do in a very short amount of time this evening is kind of trace the arc of the web from its inception to where we are today. Everyone's been talking about AI. I'm sure a lot of you have questions about AI. And so we're going to get to that. But I thought I would start just by asking you both to tell us a little bit about when you first met and what you were both working on at the time and how, your work informed your work over time.
Well, we were both working on, to a certain extent, competing systems. Brewster had the wide area information system, and I had the web. And they were both basically protocols, internet protocols. Brewster's, in fact, was a standard. He was using a standard that already existed, which I should have done. Really, I'd invented my own.
Got it right.
And so basically, you could sit there on your computer and go out and look for information. So WAIS, it was called, and the web. Whereas we'd end up at the conferences where people discussed wide area information systems, I guess.
I remember it in Boston, and I think John Markoff had written a piece on publishing on the internet, that the idea of this ARPANET defense system was going to be used for going and finding and retrieving information over networks. And he wrote this piece, and it was on the front page of the business section of the New York Times. And I think it took me by surprise. And I remember it taking Tim by surprise that there was so much interest in this internet thing, because this internet thing had been around from our perspective for years and years, but it was starting to achieve a usability that people could then start to see themselves a part of. The Wide Area Information Service was really about publishing and trying to make people so that they can go and publish their own stories, make everyone a publisher, but also make publishers put them on this new open network as opposed to the closed gardens that we had before. And that's what made the web project, the Gopher project, the Waze project, all simpatico. And we're all good friends and solving different parts of it. The display of the World Wide Web was clearly superior, and you could easily go and put things together very easily. The search part, the Waze part, I think was fairly important, and the Gopher made it so that anybody could set up, by just downloading a piece of free software onto their Macintosh, they could suddenly be a server. So there's all of these systems we just merged, and the Mosaic browser from NCSA was a mosaic of these different services all in one, and that became Netscape. And so the front door of all of that, of course, is the web.
So at the time that you met, it sounds like it was when you were at MIT, it was in Boston. Tim, what brought you to the U.S., after you had this vision and you invented the World Wide Web? What actually made you come here to, bring it to the mainstream?
So I was told that by people come digital equipment corporations, for example, Alan Kotok, in fact, I remember, came into my office at CERN in Geneva, and with a few colleagues from a committee that was trying to figure out what DEC should do about the internet. He said that, Tim, you've designed this protocol, but it's no good you can't just design a protocol. You have to start a consortium. And ideally, you have to have MIT running a consortium, because MIT knows how to do that sort of thing. So what you should do is...
according to MIT.
And according to Alan Kotok, he's a big MIT guy, big Model Railway Society member, for example, and lots of strong links with MIT, which I learned later. He was working for Digital Equipment Corporation. So, for example, contingent of people arriving in my office in Switzerland saying you should do something like run a consortium out of MIT. But I didn't necessarily take his word for it. In 1992, I spent a month on Sandhill Road, spent a month at MIT Lab for Computer Science. So then I looked at Xerox PARC, as I had a lot of support there. But basically, lots of places in the States could have run the consortium. MIT turned out to be the place to pick, but CERN didn't really know how to run a consortium. So when it started out, we did involve INRIA, the French lab, so because they did know how to run a consortium. So basically, it started off by MIT and INRIA. But why then pick the living in Boston rather than the living in France? Because the internet invented in the US, it was US universities had all been funded to experiment with it and connect each other up with long distance cables and stuff. So the internet existed in the US. So then once the web software was available, it spread throughout all those early adopters of the internet, and they were in the US. So and the center of the web became the US.
For me, it dovetails, right? Because I was based in Boston. And so I went around and asked, where should we put the internet? And what I meant by that is, where will it really be born and come about? And so I asked Mitch Kapor, founder of Lotus, and he said, Boston, please. Danny Hillis said Tokyo. It was kind of interesting. And Bill Dunn, who came up with the term metadata, is an interesting man that you don't know about, but he's fabulous. He said, go someplace that people don't think you're crazy. And that's the Bay Area. That was the start for me. I knew how to deal with the ARPANET and the internet and the supercomputer folks and the publishers. And I worked with the New York Times, putting them online, Wall Street Journal, put them online, on and on and on. But I didn't know the personal computer world hadn't gotten networks to work yet. They didn't have operating systems that were worth using. The Next machine was sort of the first one that had a real operating system, and that wasn't Apple or the PC. So for me, it was going to be in the United States, and I put my cards on the Bay Area.
Brewster, I mean, what was the impetus for you wanting to create the archive in 1996? Because at that point, the World Wide Web had only been around for a few years, really. And you kind of had the foresight then to say, we're going to need to preserve this somehow. I tend to think of things like link rot as a relatively modern phenomena. And now, of course, there's so much media, so much content out there. It kind of makes sense that we would want, for our collective and cultural memory, like a snapshot of all of that somewhere. But you were thinking about this really early on.
It started way before 96. So in 1980, we knew what the future was going to look like. We knew there was going to be desktop publishing. We knew there was going to be all of this stuff. But the Mac didn't exist yet. There was this, ARPANET. These computers cost $5 million, and they had 32 megabytes of RAM. But we knew what the curves were. And so I basically wanted to build the library. To build the library, we had to get the ARPANET transition to the internet. We need to get supercomputers to be able to do search. So I helped that out. And so this wasn't all me, right? But there were a bunch of us. Trying to get this whole thing to work. Had to try to get it so that people could see the commercial potential, so that they'd start publishing on this open network, as opposed to the LexisNexis or the Nintendos or these CompuServe and Prodigy, these closed things. So the protocols, which is what Tim mentioned, were just so key to be open, that you needed a way to have a permissionless way of joining into this thing. So we needed free and open source software, which Stallman delivered. And so we needed all of these protocols and structures to work. By the time we got to, the web was running, we got a lot of publishing going. By 96, it was going well enough I could turn to the real project, which was the library. That was the goal. That was the dream of the internet that I signed on to in 1980. And we needed all of these pieces to go, and it worked. It worked. And it worked large part because of, Tim, and there were others like Vint Cerf that were basically statesmen, that basically sat out just going and making a monopoly out of it, patenting something and making a bunch of money so you can buy a house in Atherton. So that they basically worked to try to make everybody else's party happen. So I think of Tim as the statesman for the internet in terms of dedicating himself to other people going out and making things happen.
Mm-hmm. And so if we were to trace the arc of the internet, we're talking about a time that was open source, free, not commercialized. Fast forward just a few years later, the internet becomes commercialized. Fast forward into the 2000s and the 2010s, we're all sort of living on platforms and in mobile apps and in social apps. And the internet is a very, very different place than it was than the time that you are describing. You both have very strong feelings about this, coming from your different perspectives. And one of the things that you've both talked about is this idea of bringing it back to the decentralized web. What does that mean exactly?
So who here has got your own domain name? Who's got a domain name?
Oh, that's great.
A lot of us.
A lot. You got domain names, so when you get your own domain name, then you can have your own website. But originally, the people who built their own websites early on, anybody can make your own websites. You have to get a domain name, which was a bit clunky, and we can talk about afterwards whether the domain names have been sort of properly managed or not, but anybody could make your own website. And so that was that feeling of empowerment, that feeling of, we call it digital sovereignty now, when you're sitting there and you have your own identity online, you have a website, you could buy and sell things, you can write, when you send email or you contribute to a discussion, everybody can see who you are. There's a reputation system thing going on, so that your identity, when you're writing discussion publicly, is tied to your blogs and it's tied to everything else. People felt utopian about it early on, with the early days of the web, because they thought that if everybody was appear on internet and you just connect everybody, then everybody would just get on. And so they wrote the 2 Chain manifesto, and now everybody's on Facebook. And so what went wrong? And so what Brewster's doing, he's got this push to go back. So the web back then was decentralized because anybody, in the sense that anybody could make their own website. How can we get back to the decentralized web? So there's a project, decentralizing the web is one of the projects, and Brewster's been convening people who are involved in that.
Well, you've got a system of Solid, which is sort of trying to get back to you own your own data. Solid system is a really key idea that I think, please explain.
So, yep, I talk about it in the book, by the book. So Solid is like, as a protocol, it's like HTTP, but it's got more stuff in it. It's HTTP with knobs on. It allows you to log on with a Solid ID. And when you, unlike with, if you can log on with Facebook, or you can log on with Google. If you log on with Google, then Google tracks you. If you log on with Facebook, Facebook tracks you. If you log on with Solid, nobody tracks you. So when you log on with Solid, then you can have an identity. And it's a bit like having your own website. You have a thing we call it digital wallet, data wallet. As we call it, a Solid pod. It's a bit, if you've noticed in your life that if you use Apple software, it stores stuff in the iCloud, and you use Google software, it stores it in the G Drive. And if you use a Microsoft software, it stores it in Microsoft Cloud. So this is all very well, but there's no interoperability between those. And the Solid movement is about getting interoperability at that level. Any app should be able to write to any store. Your Microsoft software should be able to save in your iCloud. It should be able to save in your G Drive, and so on. So the Solid protocol is just another form of HTTP. It's standardized in WCC, in the Linked Web Storage Working Group. And it's a world in which you are re-empowered as an individual.
Mm-hmm. Yep. So it's a world in which, the big platforms don't go away, so to speak. But if we're going to be in this world where we are using them, then at the very least, you should be able to authenticate with a service like Solid and maintain your privacy and your data sovereignty, as you describe it. Brewster, what does a decentralized web mean to you in this era of internet?
A game with many winners. So can we make it so that you're not a second-class citizen in some feudal sense, where you're sort of owned and controlled, where everything's licensed, you actually own things, right? How do you make that work? So maybe that sort of, what was the arc of the internet that I think I saw going through is we came about at a time when we were trying to bust out of these walled gardens, these sort of systems that were kind of owned and controlled by whether it was DEC and DECnet, right? Then we had the internet, and we had this mechanism of having it expand outside of the licensed behavior of some large corporation. So there was this sort of idea of cyberspace, right? That was how we talked about things back in the day. And then there was sort of the Wild West, right? So it started to not be in space, but it now is the Wild West. There was a frontier. It was kind of dangerous. It was kind of fun. It was kind of wacky. And then there was the information superhighway, right? So that was the metaphor for where we were and what we were doing. That was the, commerce, and it's going to be regulated commerce, but anybody could drive a truck on the information superhighway. It wasn't the railroad where it was all controlled by somebody, but it kept moving, right? In terms of what the metaphor of how things move along. And then there was surfing. So now we're sort of on top of this thing, right? What does surfing mean, right? It's like, wow, okay, you can swim in it, you can dive in. And so that was kind of the metaphor for a while. And then things started to turn a little wacky. And we had, Facebook and the Borg, right? They would take you on and take you over. And it wasn't sort of feeling like it was on your side. Then there was these other things going on. And we started to get back to these large-scale organizations again, controlling way too much. So now we have AI that also feels like it may end up being just a few big winners. Why don't we make it so that there's lots of winners? Lots of people can use these tools. They can build models for themselves. They can go and have chats with themselves, base their old email archives. Can we go and make some of these things work without centralized control of it? And it is possible. And in fact, those that pursue the decentralized structures often really have an uptick in commercial success because it can go and enable and empower lots of people. The big monopolies don't like it because they want to control everything. But can we go and make a game with many winners? Can we make it so that there's data sovereignty, that you don't feel like you're beholden, so you feel like you're not always being watched and you want to go and build something or retreat into your world? That was the optimism and sort of the utopianism that a lot of us held in the early days. And the technology is still here to build it. It does require the will. We don't have the same government as what we did then. The Clinton-Gore world of trying to push the United States into this area was real. That actually made a big difference. We don't have that kind of leadership anymore. We actually have problems because we don't have antitrust anymore. So these companies have grown absurdly big. I had no idea that we were going to get to these corporations in that 1980, that we hadn't given up on antitrust yet. So let's make a game with many winners.
You mentioned that the tools are still here for people to build a decentralized web. And you also mentioned that some people do manage to sort of attain financial success in doing that. But it does seem like the incentive structure is really pretty lopsided right now. And so for the developers on the internet or the, creators who build, their own sort of platforms, they are incentivized to be on the big platforms because that's where they see themselves making money, essentially. So how do you convince the people kind of building worlds online that they should do it on something, like the Fediverse or something that just doesn't go back to that central location?
A prominent internet figure in Silicon Valley says competition is for losers. It's like, what? So Cisco made a really good business by going and making an environment, TCP/IP, which you could compete with, right? There was a whole swash. The internet and the dot-com boom was made up of competition between people that knew how to do protocols, and they could go and always try to outcompete each other. That's how you make vibrancy in the commercial world work. It's also how you make innovation go, and you make it so that people don't feel lock-in. It just works better. So yes, if you can be a monopoly, I guess your business schools, they do that, but it's not the right way to run an industry or a culture. And so I think that we can try to reinvigorate ourselves based on protocols, not platforms, to go and build a better internet.
Mm-hmm.
We think that the government then needs to step in with antitrust, to break up these monopolies.
It's a lot easier to prevent things from buying each other than it is to break them up. And often we wait too long. It doesn't have a theme. And it feels that the regulations, I think, are coming across as corrupt, not well implemented. So yes, I think we need some more statesmen. Please bring up another generation of people that can look after the development of an ecosystem, both in government, in the standards bodies, in the technology, and in our companies.
That's actually what I was going to ask you, Tim, which is, Brewster has rightfully called you a statesman many times tonight. And you are someone who, with your abilities and your vision, could be someone who's like living on Billionaires Row and probably have your own venture capital firm by now and funding lots of startups. But you have maintained your role as someone who is here to sort of support the health of the web. How do you think, aside from just being a stunning example, how do you think you convince a younger generation of internet builders to actually take on roles like that, to be statesmen and not to just look to make a buck?
Well, when you look at our people out there who spend their lives trying to build a better world, some of them work for non-profits, some of them work for themselves. But what I say is when the people that I'm working with, the people that come to Brewster's organizations, events about the decentralized web, they're all passionate about building a better world. They don't always feel that they can see a path from here to there, but they know pieces of it and they're happy to put effort into building pieces of it. So the spirit of that is, for me, of all those people trying to build a better world individually, is really an amazing thing. And that's very motivating.
Tim, what drove you to write this book and why now?
Last book was 1999. So that was a long time ago. So decades had happened since then. Partly it's telling the story of those decades, but also more importantly, it's saying what we're saying tonight. There is a world in which the web is better. There is a world in which humanity is better. And so the last piece of it, so there's chapters about painting pictures of the world. And I want to sort of paint the pictures of what the world, the way I would like it to be. And even if it's seemed really hard to actually go in that direction, I think people really appreciate the fact that there's a picture painted of a world where it could be different. How we get there is in the future, what happens in the future, of course, with AI changing so fast, is very, very hard to pick. But a lot of the motivation for writing the book was to paint a picture, a more optimistic picture of the future.
I've only been able to read part of your book so far, I have to admit, but it's very good. And it sounds like, in recounting your early life, you were kind of predestined, to be this legendary inventor of the computer age. You were born the same year as Steve Jobs and Bill Gates, which I hadn't known before. Your parents knew Alan Turing. Unfortunately, you did not have the opportunity to know him because he died the year before you were born. And you said that from a young age, you understood that computers were something that could help you kind of record things, but they weren't yet replicating in the human brain or the human memory in the way that we make random associations and connect things, which was kind of the formative thoughts for you thinking about the web. Now we're living in this world where AI is basically not only connecting things for us, but doing the thinking for us. Did either of you have a sense back then that this was the AI that we were building towards?
I think, well, early on, my parents, they met building the first computer in the UK, and so Turing was defining what a computer was. What can a computer do and what can it not do? And early on, they were saying, can it be intelligent? They were wondering whether they could program the computers they had there to be intelligent. Sort of about how would you tell what would the Turing test is to tell if something is intelligent or not. Is it conscious or not, for example? So that arc, I think, that started with Alan Turing asking what the computer really was. Now, with ChatGPT, suddenly, wow, we have a computer program which is very clearly intelligent, which is, I think, staggering. It was staggering even for people working on it. They didn't expect, I think, ChatGPT to be so effective. And now we've got a whole bunch of things like that.
But the idea of all of this, absolutely. So the things that were inspiring to us at MIT, some of those times, there was the book Global Brain. There was the Memex by Vannevar Bush, which laid out, actually, we haven't even gotten to the telepathic interfaces that he put out in this paper in 1945. Ted Nelson's Xanadu, the concept of hypertext. We basically already in the computer world had promised the Library of Congress on your desk. And we hadn't delivered. And it's like, how hard could that be? And it turned out to be a lot harder than I thought it would be. But we went off to then build thinking machines. We called it thinking machines. And it was to go and build a
Thinking machine.
thinking machine. Danny Hillis said we wanted to build a machine that would be proud of us, which I kind of love that sort of provocative. And so we knew we needed to build something that was interesting enough to have people interact with it and teach it. And if you think that, AI happened in 2022 with ChatGPT, it's like, if you've used Google ever, you've been using AI for decades. If, as you point out, Google Maps, all this stuff is AI. It's these sort of fuzzy matching, lots of data, memory-based reasoning is what David Waltz and I called it when we were doing how do you go and recognize digits back in the mid-'80s. So all this sort of how do you use large amounts of data as opposed to a smart, tiny algorithm, right? Those were sort of the counters back in that day. But we knew what we were trying to build. The real change for me is the regulatory bailing on their jobs and corporations taking way too much advantage of what it is they find they can do to try to eke out more money and more power and more control. So did it come out quite how I thought? I thought we were building along some things that would be interesting. It needs to know a lot. It's the only way that we're going to make it so that these libraries that we built over centuries of materials, of newsletters, and people aren't going to go and back and find them. I mean, we've tried indexing structures, we've tried the card catalogs, we've tried full text search. It's tough. These AI things can make it so that we can use all of the centuries of agricultural records to try to understand what's going to happen to the climate as it moves, as pests evolve. We have the data in our libraries, and we have the tools now to try to make some of the changes that we need to deal with climate change or health issues. So I find it actually encouraging that we can bring all of this knowledge to even better life. But we've got to do it in a way where there are more than just a few big players.
Well, you're kind of in an interesting position in that way because of the fact that the Internet Archive exists so that information can not only be preserved, but flow freely, that it's accessible to people.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember last year going to an event at the Internet Archive that was about authorship, moral panic in the age of authorship. And I went expecting that there were going to be a bunch of authors complaining about OpenAI, scraping their books and etc. And it turns out that these folks are, no, I want all the information out there. And I thought this is so fascinating to me. But what's happened actually is, these really powerful corporations, and we all know who you're referring to, they're the ones who are taking all of that free information. So back in the day when you were thinking about AI, the problem was there wasn't enough data. Now there is data, and actually it's just being scraped and it's used by the most powerful entities. So how do you square those?
The Internet Archive is designed for this. Yet the regulatory structures, we just have lawsuits happening in the United States just out the wazoo. So a lot of the materials that the Internet Archive has are not available to these entities. And, you're talking about they're hallucinating. Yeah, because they're brought up on a bunch of web stuff. And so if we don't bring up the next generation with the best we have known, we're going to get the generation we deserve. And that's happening. That's already happened in the age of Google, where we have people really confused about whether the Holocaust happened. We've denied this generation access to the library I grew up with, which doesn't make any sense. So there's just lawsuits here. In Europe, it's kind of stalled around also conflicts. So I think if we had a little bit more, we both had the honor and the support of things like CERN or MIT or these other large-scale public entities. Can we build public AI? Can we build an AI thing and sets of models that are things we'd be happy to have our children chat with? We can do this. It isn't that hard, but it requires a little change in thinking, and maybe it's a little retro to think that you can actually do things in the public sphere that would be publicly good, that you'd be transparent about it. So the Internet Archive has more data in it than the big AI companies. They all want our data, but we can't give it to them because of these structural problems. And if we don't solve them, we're going to end up with tools that are mediocre. So let's build an ecosystem of winners.
Tim, what are your thoughts on that? What are your thoughts on the idea of a public AI?
So I like the way Brewster bases it on the library. So yeah, AI has to run on data. Data is crucial for the AI. The reason that ChatGPT was so impressive was it's trained on the entire web, basically the entire web by some definition. So what's interesting now is that you can add data to the library by taking existing things out there. You could digitize 78 RPM records. You can take stuff which is outside the library, you can turn it into data. Now with AI, you can take stuff which is all in PDFs and scribbled notes and things, and now with AI, you can turn that into hard, solid data. And so this model of having sort of AIs producing data, which is then surfaced in the library being very powerful and running more AI on the data, that's the model.
How are both of you using generative AI?
I use ChatGPT for asking questions about code. When you're stuck with a coding problem, I found it's really neat.
Oh, it's fantastically useful. I mean, the generative AI things, and I don't think of it as an entertainment product or a competitor for AI. It's to help just day-to-day moving through. You can ask it questions, and it can do sort of that first level of research project pretty well. So, yeah, but I think we're using it all the time for all sorts of things. But I wanted to know more. So the Internet Archive's collections, some of them are open, like some of the web pages, like all the government web pages and all that sort of thing, or the old books, like pre-1929 books, those are open. There are a lot of scientists that choose to be open and not go for the publisher issues. So we try to make things as available as we can, but we're way short on the sorts of things that we know. You're talking about some of the AI. So we've digitized things like the ship logs from whaling missions with the Mystic Seaport, which is your home state. And those are all handwritten. But those are weather records over centuries that have really been impenetrable, or you basically waste a graduate student for a long time and typing this stuff in. But we can now see these broad swaths of information come to life as data sets that can help inform us and still have the provenance to go and say, I think this because of that, right? And make sure it works. And so I think we can build public AI. I think we can go and unleash the power of the library system by marrying the networks, the number of people involved, and the computational resources. That is the sort of combination that the internet is really making possible. And we just need to have people still want to participate and not feel shafted and abused and driven out, and don't let your children get on the internet. I mean, all of that, the internet in the earlier days was really built on trust. So we take the domain name service. That's able to be abused, and it's being abused now in Europe to go and say this company is allowed, this is not. It's being used as a mini Great Wall of China. We're seeing a balkanization of the internet where real walls are being put up by the powerful. So I think we need to get back to a way for us to interact with each other in such a way that we're not feeling taken advantage of.
Tim, what does super intelligence mean to you? And do you think we're close to it?
So to me, superintelligence means something that's smarter than me. So basically, if somebody builds something which is smarter than them, then logically, I think you have to be careful. Superintelligence is something that will need to be contained. I know people out there are a long way along the spectrum from people who think superintelligence isn't going to happen for a very long time, or the idea of superintelligence from a computer is really a contradiction in terms, because really there are people who think that you can only get superintelligence at a certain level from from neurons, and there are people who feel that superintelligence is something which they're likely to build in the next few months. And so I'm sort of on the spectrum there. I don't think it's going to happen in a few months, but I think that I'd love it if there was some big public AI process out there. So something like CERN was good. I enjoyed working at CERN. CERN was set up in order to allow the world to solve the problem of creating nuclear power, and in a way that was going to be safe, and in a way that was shared all the knowledge across all of science internationally. The CERN was a great place. If you find yourself in Europe, then it's a good place to visit. Something like CERN for AI would be, I think, neat.
That's an interesting idea. I was at a conference at U Berkeley called The Curve, which was all about AI, and it was all Chatham House rules. So can't really say like who said what, but I heard this interesting theory floated that the near future chaos could just be a bunch of hapless AI agents running around doing our bidding for us rather than, some big, large scale super intelligence. Because there's been a lot of talk about agentic AI sort of taking over our internet experience too. What are your thoughts on that? What are your thoughts on how agents are going to transform the web?
Well, they'll transform the world. So having an agent that can work for you is where AI is going. And so, yeah, they'll transform the web in the sense that just like with current AI, people tend to go and ask AI a question instead of going out to search engine question. And that means if they ask the AI question instead of the search engine, then they don't get that list of search engine results back, and they don't click on links. When they don't click on links, they don't get to those pages which reward the creators with advertising or subscriptions and so on. So basically, yes, there is a concern that people just use AI instead of using search engines. The whole mechanism of ad-based revenue for the web kind of crumbles if we're not careful.
Any thoughts on that, Brewster?
So the superintelligence, or sort of where is AI? I think of technology as extending the arms of humans. At least at first, there's sort of this idea that it's all going to detach from us and become Skynet and turn us all off or whatever. And that may happen. But there's going to be a period of time when it's really just extending the power of the powerful. And if we're not careful, it will really superpower the existing power structures, whether it's corporations being able to do more things. So they're agents, they have agents, they're called employees now, but they just want millions of minions. Well, that's a problem. The military will also leverage, as one friend points it, the war on one. So why not just have drones that can do facial recognition and blow themselves up? That could be really effective at mass scale with things that cost a couple $100 of Chinese hardware that exists. So I think we'll see the military become more militaristic, and we'll see corporations become more like what they're programmed to become in business school. And it will be augmented and helped by these machines. So how do we change that dynamic? Is realize that we really need to try to keep down wealth inequality. We need to go and distribute power. We need to try to keep spikes in control away from the levers of power. That's not easy. That's not the current trend in the United States. Is it doable? It is doable. These are tools that we can use. We're still in charge. And actually, conversations happening in San Francisco, it's within 100 miles of here. So we actually can do a lot towards reshaping a future to have more winners. It's up to us still. Let's take the advantage.
And Tim, any final thoughts on that? Perhaps something from your book, since your book strikes a note of optimism in this crazy world.
So why optimism? Yes. In the book, I explain how I was doing nonprofits for a long time, but then I eventually decided that I should co-found a company. So it talks about how with John Bruce, I co-founded Inrupt. And so it's been really neat having been part of nonprofits and academic groups for a long time to be in a company where you can just decide what to do and execute it. So that has been a neat experience. What Interrupt is doing is building a version of the solid compatible server, which is scalable and secure and is running a bunch of data wallets. And for example, the Flanders government is using it as an interface between the government and the citizen. The last chapter of the book is called Signs of Spring, because I noticed that there are a few things out there which are green and hopeful. Yeah.
So it sounds like our takeaways are that we are still in charge as humans. The technology is an extension of us. Build a company, if you feel strongly about it, in making the internet and the web a better place. And it's okay to use ChatGPT once in a while too, is what I'm gathering from you both.
Kind of awesome.
Okay.
Thanks for joining us on this journey into the future of knowledge. Be sure to follow the show. New episodes drop every other Wednesday with bold ideas, fresh insights, and the voices shaping tomorrow.